Well, we've come to week 4 of our second year of our journey through the Word. And we continue to walk with Isaiah as Isaiah prophesies concerning the coming destruction of Judah and also of the surrounding nations, especially Babylon. And this week, I want to bring your focus to a specific portion of Isaiah's words, rather than looking at each of the things, which is much of a repeat of things that we've already heard. But I want to look at a specific portion of Isaiah's words, which are found in chapter 22. And speaking of focusing on one portion of scripture, it's obvious that Isaiah's words carry messages for more than one time period and one era. It also carries twofold message. And I want to explain that a little farther, because it amazes me how the Spirit of God has the ability to take words and within those words speak a message that's for two different messages. Let me give you an example of what I'm saying. There are these pictures that are called ambiguous images or reversible images. I am going to put an ambiguous or reversible image on the screen for you. And as you look at this image, I want you to think of, what do you see? Now, there's actually two images that are in this picture. At first glance, you might see an old woman. Or some of you at first glance may see a very young woman, very beautiful woman. Both of those pictures are contained within this image. It just depends on your focus. Now, if you're having a hard time seeing the old woman, I just want you to look at the very bottom of the picture, and that white portion that comes down is her chin. And then look up a little farther, you see her nose, and then you see her hair. If you're having a hard time seeing the young woman, I want you to see the part that was the old woman's nose, see that as the bottom of her neck. And then you look up a little and you see her chin and then her hair, and she's got a lovely hat on. So hopefully you can see the two images that are there. Why is this important? I believe it's important because often scripture does the same thing, and it depends on our focus as to whether we see the negative or the positive. As we're going through Isaiah and as we went through Jeremiah, because there's so much doom and gloom that's prophesied there, we can get so focused on that negative old lady picture that we fail to see the beauty, and the beauty that comes as a result of the constant prophecies that Messiah is coming and that Messiah will bring forth a kingdom that will endure forever. Not only can we see two different messages in the same words, just like we could see two different pictures from the same picture, and both of them were there, but there's also what's called an autostereogram. And in an autostereogram, it's a bit different. Once again, I'm going to put an image, which is an autostereogram, on your screen. And again, after I say a few words, you may want to pause and see if you can't find the image. But in this image, it looks like just a nice design. But as you focus on it, really focus, and there's different ways to focus. Some people have to kind of cross their eyes. Some people have to blur their eyes. Others, it helps to say to them, look beyond the image, like you're looking straight through it. And as you do that, you'll find that this image will take on a three-dimensional picture. And in that three-dimensional picture, what you're going to see is you're going to see a clear image of a camel. And now it's not just a two-dimensional picture. Now it's three-dimensional. Now you're looking beyond the surface of that picture. And I believe so often that that's how Isaiah speaks to us. He speaks words that there's a image, and sometimes it's not as clear as we would like it to be, and sometimes it's more of a pattern. But when the understanding comes, we find that the word is not only for now, but the word is that 3D image for something that's beyond the surface of the picture. And that's exactly what I see this week as we continue in Isaiah and hear his warning of God's judgment and his promises of Messiah and his kingdom. I would like to focus on, again, that one passage of scripture. And this passage of scripture has eluded me for so many years. If you look at my Bible, I know it's talking about Messiah, and I've underlined it in purple for Messiah. That's my color for Jesus and for Messiah. And years and years and years ago, I underlined it in my Bible and said, God, I know this pertains to the rest of this portion of scripture, but I just don't get it. And so I want to read that portion of scripture to you. And I'm sure when I come to it, when I come to the verse, you'll probably do the same thing that I did and go, what does that mean? So I'm going to read from Isaiah 22, beginning in verse 15 and going to verse 25. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, come, go to this steward, to Shebna, who is in charge of the royal household. What right do you have here? And whom do you have here, that you have hewn a tomb for yourself here? You who hew a tomb on the heights, you who carve a resting place for yourself in the rock. Behold, Yahweh is about to hurl you headlong, O man, and he is about to grasp you firmly and roll you tightly like a ball to be cast into a vast country. There you will die, and there your splendid chariots will be, you shame of your master's house. I will dispose you from your office, and I will put you down from your station. Then it will come about in that day that I will summon my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and I will clothe him with your tunic and tie your sash securely about him. I will entrust him with your authority, and he will become a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. Then I will set the key of the house of David on his shoulder. When he opens, no one will shut. And when he shuts, no one will open. I will drive him like a peg in a firm place, and he will become a throne of glory to his father's house. So they will hang on him all the glory of his father's house, offspring and issue, all the least of vessels, from bowls to all the jars. In that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, the peg driven in a firm place will give way. It will even break off and fall, and the load hanging on it will be cut off, for Yahweh has spoken. As we read through this scripture, there are some portions of this scripture that are familiar to us, and we know that it's talking about Jesus, the Messiah, and that one day he will come and the key of the house of David will be upon his shoulder. In other words, he will have all the authority. And when he shuts, no one will open, and when he opens, no one will shut. We know that this is speaking of Christ. It's in the quoted again in the book of Revelation, and it's of Christ. And so as we read this, we understand that portion. But when we came to that other part, did you find yourself going, what does that mean? Again, it says, in that day, declares Yahweh, the peg driven in a firm place will give way. It will even break off and fall, and the load hanging on it will be cut off, for Yahweh has spoken. We need to understand the context of this scripture. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, who's Shebna, who's being replaced? Well, we find that Shebna was a scribe. He was a historian, and he was in charge of the king's household. He wasn't in charge of the temple. He was in charge of the king's household. But we find that he was not of the royal line, and yet he assumed that he was worthy of the honor of royal lineage. And because of this pride and because of this arrogance, God is telling him, I'm replacing you with someone who is worthy of the office. Now, once again, we see that there is a twofold message in here, and especially as we go on in the next chapter, and it talks about the fall of the king of Tyre. We know this is talking about Satan. And who is this Shibna, this scribe? Well, if we try to look up his name, we find that they don't know what his name means. There are some educated guesses, but that's exactly what they are. They're just guesses. And so what we do know about Shibna was filled with pride. He was filled with his own self-worth. Now, we know who that is a picture of. The man of pride, the one who puts himself in a place that he doesn't belong, is a type and a shadow of Satan himself. Then who is Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah? Eliakim, we can look up his name, and Eliakim means God sets up. And as we look at who he is, he's the son of Hilkiah. What is Hilkiah? Hilkiah means my portion is Yah, or is Yahweh. So who is the one who is exalted and set up? Who is the very portion of God? Well, once again, we find that pretty easy. That certainly is a picture of Christ. And we find that Eliakim was of royal lineage. And so we find, once again, a beautiful picture of Christ, who is of royal lineage, of the Father's lineage, who God sets up above all others. And he is the very portion of who God is to us. We see all that, and that's not hard to make that correlation between them. The problem comes with the next verse. In that day declares Yahweh of hosts, the peg driven in a firm place will give way. It will even break off and fall, and the load hanging on it will be cut off, for Yahweh has spoken. As I've tried to find what this last verse here actually means and what was God trying to tell us, I thought, well, maybe I'll go to some of my Jewish books and how do the Jews look at this portion of scripture? What I found very interesting is, as I looked at it, basically what they have said is, we find it very hard to reconcile this verse with the verses that are right before it. Why is the firm peg that's been put in a firm place and who has the very authority of God, why is it now being broken off? Now, we can look at it in Isaiah's time, and one of the possibilities is that it's a prophecy that even though God is going to establish Eliakim, that in time Babylon will come. It doesn't mention Babylon here, but that he's going to fall and all of it. But it just, even at that, they all agree. It just doesn't make sense. So they've found it very hard to reconcile this verse with the rest. As I said to God, I'm tired of not understanding it. Could you help me? And I began to study it out word by word. And as I did, and when I saw the revelation of that verse, I said, oh, no wonder the Jews can't reconcile this verse. I'm surprised that Christians haven't seen this, and those who translate scriptures haven't seen the beautiful message that's in this verse. Let me help you to see how did I come to the conclusion that I'm about to come to. I'm going to take you through the steps that I took in doing this word study and how they make their own statement. I'm not going to change words. I am just going to look at the definition of words, and then we will put the definition together. Listen to it. It says that the peg that's driven in a firm place will give way. As we look at the word give way, mush in Hebrew, it literally means the peg, which we know is a person, will depart or be removed. And then it says that he will break off. As I look at the Hebrew word, which is gadah, and as I look at that word, what we find is that this word literally means to hew down. It doesn't mean to break off, it means to hew down or to be chopped down. Remember, too, we've talked a lot about chopping and things that are going to be chopped down and the root of Jesse springing up. And so it goes on to say that the peg driven will give way, depart, be removed, break off, to be hewn down, and fall. As we look at this word fall, it literally means to fall. But we use this word fall in our English, our word fall. We use it many ways. So it is in the Hebrew. I can say she fell down. I can say he fell from grace. I can say he fell in battle. This Hebrew word, nafal, is used the same way. I want you to listen to 1 Samuel 31, verse 8, when it says, "It came about on the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa." As you can see, I've marked it there. The word fallen. What is that word fallen? It's nafal. So what does it mean that when it tells us that Saul and his 3 sons had fallen on Mount Gilboa? Well, it's telling us that he died. And we see this term used, that they will fall by the edge of the sword. What does that mean? It means they're going to be killed. They're going to die by the edge of the sword. How the mighty have fallen, how the mighty have died. And so we see this verse shows us how this word can also be used. I'm not using a different word. I'm using the exact same word. And this word can also mean to die. And then it goes on to say that the load that's put on him, and as we look at that word masah, the word load there means a burden that is carried. That's literally what it means. The load, the burden that was carried. What happens to that? It says that it's cut off. Once again, we look at karat, it means to cut off, to eliminate, to remove. So if I take those words and take these definitions, I want to read it to you again and listen to the beautiful message that's in these words. "In that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, the peg driven in a firm place will be removed. He will be hewn down and die. And the burden he carried will be removed and come to an end, for Yahweh has spoken." What is it speaking of? It's speaking of Christ. It's speaking how this one who will come, who is the glory of the Father's house, who is the one who is the Messiah. It's talking about his first coming. When he comes the first time, in that day, what is he going to do? When he overcomes Satan, because it's talking, remember, we're talking about Shibna, the one filled with pride. He is going to be brought down. And how is he going to be brought down? This tells us how he's going to be brought down. The peg driven in a firm place, who is Messiah, he will come and he will be hewn down and he will die. And in his death, he will carry off the burden that he has been carrying for us. What is the burden? The burden is the burden of sin and the burden of the law. You see, because Christ is the end of the burden of the law for righteousness' sake. It is also the burden of sin that he's dealt with. Listen to Colossians 2, verses 13 and 14. "When you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of degrees against us, which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. What a beautiful correlation of Colossians 2, verses 13 and 14, with these beautiful verses and this beautiful verse in Isaiah chapter 22. I hope that you can see that there are many levels to read Isaiah on. You can read it for what happened historically. You can read it for what is going to happen in the days to come. And you can read it for what Christ did when he came. I hope this helps you to see how to do a word study. And we're not changing words. We're just looking at what the words mean. And when we look at the full meaning of their words, it's so easy now to look at that scripture and say, God, thank you. In that day, declares the Lord of hosts, Yahweh of hosts, the peg driven in a firm place will be removed. He will be hewn down and die, and the burden he carried will be removed and come to an end, for Yahweh has spoken. Aren't we thankful that we live on this side of that revelation? We know the peg that was firmly driven in its place. And we also know that he's the one who's carried away the burden of law and the burden of sin. I pray you enjoy your journey through Isaiah and with Isaiah this week. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.